Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing marvelously well. We're big, bad, and back, and in black, with another frequently asked questions with Mr. Matt Lange.
Hello.
Matt, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. Always fantastic to see you.
Always pleasure. Good to be here in person.
Well, so we're going to do a double whammy. We'll do some questions, but also we're going to do the guitar of the day.
This is true.
So, but let's start off with the questions because we were thinking about what are the best questions, and we do have a list of frequently asked questions that Eric compiles from under the videos. So please leave some comments and questions below for future videos. What I was thinking of, and we just talked about it briefly, is the number one question I get asked all the time, and different versions of this question, is sidechaining, and sidechaining. Now, considering your world is definitely more electronic based, although of course you're a great guitar player as well, but you're well known for doing electronic music, which has a tendency, I'm not saying entirely, but definitely to be loud and slamming. And I do hear a lot of sidechaining going on because you're all these different instruments and parts trying to compete with each other. And such a big question. And we were talking about earlier, you brought it up, that dynamic EQ is actually relatively new.
Yeah.
So there was multi-band compression before that. And then, of course, there was just straight-ahead compression side. And all of these things can be sidechained. So this massive question is, when do you sidechain using EQ? When do you sidechain using multi-band? What are all the different types of things that you do?
How do I do it?
And why do you do it?
Okay. So the answer is I use all of them.
Good.
It's not that I prefer one over the other. Traditional sidechain compression, of course, where it's just, wideband compression, your regular compressor. I tend to use that on something I don't want to be as extreme. So, for instance, if I have like a pad sound or something like that, and I want to duck that to maybe if it is, a kick drum or something like that, I'd probably do that with a compressor because I don't want to clamp it all the way down to 0. I just want to, notch it down by, say, 6 dB or something like that.
Right.
And maybe also like the old trick, in rock bands, we would do this with, you would sidechain your bass to the kick drum and things like that, which really was the precursor to, electronic music, where I think Benny Benassi, when he did that Satisfaction record, that was the first time, at least in my ears, when it was extreme use of sidechain compression. I think I was actually in the box, but there was another famous one that was the Alesis 3630, that old really cheap compressor.
Yeah, I remember it well.
Yeah, that was used for a lot of sidechain compression, actually.
Really?
Yeah, for a lot of the early dance records, it was the Alesis. So to answer your question, I would use, or more specifically, I would use kind of old school sidechain compression for things that I can be a little more subtle with, or I guess more heavy-handed, more obvious, but I don't want to really clamp it all the way. I just want to be a little bit more tasteful.
Okay.
Multiband compression, or sidechaining a band within a multiband compressor, this is, I still do this to the day. I love it. And I would do it when I just want to carve out a specific frequency range. So for instance, if I had a lot of guitars and a vocal at the same time, and like we were talking about previously, yeah, of course, I can do a volume ride and, maybe duck the guitars by 2 dB here and there. But what I will often do is I will send the vocal on a bus, and then I'll set my external input on my multiband compressor to whatever that mid-range frequency that the vocal is sitting in. So let's say it's around 600 to 800 hertz or something like that. So every time the vocal hits the compressor, it just dips down only at that one frequency. So it's not ducking the entire guitar. It's just taking out basically where there might be some added mud that's building up between the two, and they're fighting for that frequency range.
How do you judge that? Obviously the quick answer is I use my ears, and which I totally understand. But if you're starting off, would you maybe stick a frequency analyzer across it, or an EQ that showed a build up when the two things were going together?
No. I wouldn't use an analyzer because I guess I would need 2 analyzers, or I'd have to put an analyzer on my bus. And I actually never use an analyzer on my master ever. I probably should. But no, it's an ear thing.
Right.
And I also know that, just the way I like doing guitars too, I like mid-range. I like it too much.
Okay.
And I also if I'm doing my own vocal or something like that, I also know when I sing, I have a hump that's always around 240 or something like that. So I know myself and I know my instruments.
Yeah.
But I also just know what I want to dip out kind of intuitively, because also I've just been doing it for a long time. But the reality is sometimes I will just, I won't use an analyzer, but I might take an EQ and just like, it's that trick where you just boost the frequency where you're trying to find the problem. Just do that and find like, oh, it's 650. That's where the mud is.
Right.
And then that's where I would maybe send a sidechain into that multiband compressor band right there.
What about just simply taking the whole vocal and using it sidechain on the multiband and just sending it into the multiband over the whole instrument, just letting it do what it does. So as there might be a little extra top on one word, there might be, so maybe 3K, high mids get a bit aggressive on one word you're singing, and then it goes to a more 700, 800 hertz. Do you ever just do that? Just feed the whole vocal into it?
Not like that, because then I would need all these different bands. That would all be sidechained independently. And I guess that would be something with a dynamic EQ. I think that would probably be more appropriate, but it also gets tricky, I suppose, now because you only get one sidechain input.
Right.
So if you could have multiple sidechain inputs, say on a multiband compressor or a dynamic EQ, where you could say, this instrument's just going to, be keyed to the high end, this instrument's going to do the mids. And I guess you could do that with, multiple. Yeah. And I will do that, where I'll stack multiple multiband compressors with each of them being sidechained by different things. But as far as I know, there isn't a way necessarily where it can, analyze all these different things and basically,
Yeah, it's interesting because I just keep thinking to myself, there was sort of a time, especially when I was doing like much heavier music when I first started off.
Yeah.
Sometimes songs were built almost like jigsaw puzzles. I'd get in there and like take the top end of the guitars off at like 10 or 12K, and just boom, everything was gone completely. And then if I had some acoustic sparkle, I could leave a little 10 or 12 on the acoustic. And then, like you're saying, there could be some build up where maybe the bass has a bit of honkiness I want to cut. So I just pull that out of the guitars. And I remember working with Neil Avron, and he always, and I do it now, he always cuts 2K out of guitars.
Really?
Which is interesting because you can boost frequencies either side of it and still give the illusion of pure mids.
Yeah.
But the 2K area is quite nice cut on guitars because it lets a bit of a crack on a snare. It lets the glassiness of a vocal. It's an ugly frequency to boost, but it's a nice frequency to cut out of some instruments to let other ones breathe.
Interesting. That actually reminds me of something I'll do sometimes too, and it doesn't matter if you did it with a dynamic EQ or if you have a multiband compressor that can do it, but you only sidechain a band that's on the mids and not the sides. So you can retain then, say, all the mid-range on the sides, but in your center channel, that's what's being ducked by the vocal or the lead.
It's funny because Mark was talking about this as well. We just did a short with him talking about, EQing the sides differently to the center. I don't know if I'm old school or whatever it is like I just don't use any MS stuff at all, ever.
Yeah.
Is it a necessity in certain genres to compete?
I don't think it's a necessity at all. I don't do a ton of it, to be honest. But sometimes it just makes more sense where, for instance, I can say I have like a nice lush pad or strings or something like that. And the thing is, like, strings are very mid-rangey too. I mean, orchestral instruments in general are mid-rangey. So if you have some other kind of lead, whether it's a guitar lead or whether it's a vocal or anything like that, sometimes what you can do is like you could, let's duck the mid-range out of the center channel a little bit just to, give room for that, say that vocal. But then you can boost the high end on the sides, and that's going to make them sound like bigger and floatier and wider, but you're not going to compete with the vocal in the center.
Right.
So I'll use it like that, but I'm not using MS all the time by any means. It's just it's a tool to have.
I find, talking to strings, that's the only real time personally I end up using them. If I've got somebody gives me something with a ton of synths, first thing I usually do is just take everything out of stereo because they're giving me like 8 synth parts that are all...
And it's all washed in reverb and
So I'll just start going, what can I use in mono? What can I feature on this side that I can, maybe on the left, I can balance on the right, or the other way around for you watching, I can balance on the right. And then if there's pads which have to be stereo, that's when I'll use MS because I'll try and clear them out of the middle. Yeah. And I think a lot of it's to do with virtual instruments, that when people are using virtual instruments, they're all in stereo. Yeah,
just by default, the instrument's stereo. Yeah. It drives me nuts.
Yeah. They get 24 stereo tracks.
Well, that's it. And like, your kick drums, which are, an 808 or something, and like no one needs a stereo 808. Like, I mean, when you try to do it, that's fun. And that's a different animal. But yeah, an actual like electronic kick sample.
Right.
No.
And sometimes the way they make them stereo is just to flip the face.
Yeah.
There was a period where there was, maybe people will remember, there was Logic had a bass sound called like wide bass or something like that. And all it was the left and right out of phase of each other.
Really?
Which is completely useless.
Back in the day when because I was a big Logic power user for a very long time, and they had a sample delay, and I would use that all the time just to and it was just really just to change the phase, but I would use it on like hi-hats or shakers or something like that, where I could just like delay the right channel by 10 samples or something really minute, but that Haas effect of when it's that different or just that far apart, suddenly that shaker is just, on either side of your head. But if you collapse it to mono, it's going to phase. Yeah.
I can hear that so easily. Yeah. The thing I always recommend to people, if you're going to do that, also change the pitch of one side.
That's what I do now. Yeah. I always I prefer pitch to delay, actually.
Yeah. I find if I do both, it can definitely work and does collapse better.
Yep.
Never actually is ever perfect, but
no, but I find also if you, instead of using like a pitch plugin, just duplicate the channel and then do like old school like Verispeed pitch shifting on it, because then the sample rate changes, and then you can actually pan them left and right and they'll collapse together.
Right. Somebody needs to, then maybe they already have, create a randomizer across the whole performance. Mm-hmm. So, because even when you're pitching it down or Verispeeding it, what you're ultimately doing is just applying the same thing to the whole track. If somebody could do something, I'm sure they do, and everybody's going to tell me. Please tell me what it is.
I'll tell you right now.
You know it? That actually just randomly changes the pitch of the whole performance.
So they're speaking of Eventide, but because we have these Eventide pedals in front of us, but
which we're going to get to in a minute.
We'll get to, but no, the Eventide micro pitch, the plugin, it's a delay plugin, but it's got pitch shifters that go plus or minus 50 cents. But then there's also a modulation, and I believe that's like an LFO that'll modulate the pitch. So
that's what.
There's
I need to use that.
But I mean, even if like you use like a micro pitch algorithm on like, old harmonizer or something, those always do warble a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, the 910, the H910, where the numbers would flicker.
Yeah, they're always just like a little jumping up. So even like the plugin version of that, what I've done for vocals before, I will just drop that on a mono channel, and it'll just make it instantly stereo because the two sides are a little independent of each other.
Right.
Yep.
This is inadvertently turned into an Eventide ad, and trust me, it's not supposed to be. We are fans of Eventide. I've always been a fan of Eventide because of Jack and all of the New York guys, because Jack would tell me stories about these mad boffin Eventide guys that would just show up at the studio in the like early mid 70s with some new box they designed. He told me about when he first heard the flanger. They were mixing. It was a famous Aerosmith track. It might be Walk This Way, and he put the flanger on the snare, and he just did it so it goes doo doo doo, just kind of detunes. And if you listen closely, you'll hear, if you can really concentrate, the snare just kind of goes doo. It's just blended in underneath. And apparently it was like either the prototype or the first one they had made. They just brought it in to try out.
Because they had the envelope follower on it. Yeah. Which was really cool. A lot of flangers don't have that.
Yeah. So that's always made me like Eventide, because I love anybody that's got the history,
Totally.
Especially associated with such classic records.
Yep.
So speaking of which, let's talk about your guitar of the day.
Okay.
This is a favorite guitar of yours. What is it?
This is a favorite guitar of mine. So I pulled this one because we just did this Pro Mix Academy course.
Yep.
And I used this guitar to do it. I remade a track and called it More is More, because I was kind of based off a track I did called Less is More, but more is better. So this is a PRS S2 Custom 24. So it's an American PRS, but it's the one where it doesn't cost, a mortgage payment to get. Which I
understand, because one of my favorite guitars is the Vela.
You have an S2 Vela up there, and it's fantastic. I got it 2.5 years ago or so, and I kind of got it originally to be my drop tune, drop C guitar.
Right.
And so I swapped out the pickups and I put the Fishman Fluence in there. And so...
all right, so just to completely change the subject for a second, tell me about this Fishman.
Okay, these are amazing, and I have Fluence now in, I think, 4 or 5 different guitars.
Fluence?
Yeah. So Fluence is it says Fishman, but Fluence is the name, Flunce.
Okay.
And so they are active. I mean, they're battery powered, but they have multiple voices per pickup.
Okay.
So this one, or both of these actually, there are different voices, but this one in my bridge, it's a kill switch engage model, which I wanted because the chugga chugga. But but the first voice is kind of like an EMG 81, but it's not as hot. It's got a little bit more mid range, and it's a little bit tighter on the low end. And I just, like I said, I love mid range. So any way I can spike the mid range further is usually what I do.
So so all the different voicings, how do you get them?
So it's just by push pulls.
Okay.
And so you pull the tone.
Yeah.
And that's going to give me the second voicing. The second voicing is supposed to be a passive, probably like a PAF style thing. I don't know exactly what it is. You pull that one, and now it's a single coil. And it's kind of like a Tele single coil.
Is there a combination with the two together?
Both pickups together, but no, not of the individual pickup voicings. And then this one is a Tosin Abasi of Animals as Leaders, and it's a very, very different sound than this. But
is it like anything in particular?
I can't say.
It's unique.
It's pretty unique, and it also, like, same thing, like you get a single coil. If you pull that one, you get a different voicing if you pull that. But it's a nice, warm, very, very clean pickup, and then the single coil is really nice on it.
Wonderful.
So that's the deal. But they're great because they sound so clean. Like, it's really just the clarity. This tuner, this little clip-on, it's a TC Electronic Polytune, and it's a really good chromatic tuner. But the cool thing is, you can actually see the tuning of all 6 strings at once if you really want.
That's amazing.
So yeah, it's great. And the battery has lasted a really long time. So
how long have you had it?
2 years.
That is a really long time.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever replaced the battery.
That's amazing.
And I use it every day because there's a semi-hollow of mine that, like, it sits on my couch, and this is always just clipped to it all the time.
Hey, 2 years is pretty amazing.
It works. So yeah. But that's the tuner. So this is the guitar, and I have it in this, basically it's a DADGAD style tuning, but it's in drop C. So C, G, C, F, G, C. Kugafuk or something. But I mean, I love this kind of tuning just because, when you have all the open string, and I play a lot of fingerstyle in general, especially on acoustic, and usually acoustic guitars would always, I don't think I have an acoustic guitar that's in a standard tuning. Everything is in weird altered tunings, but I've always loved being able just having those open sympathetic strings allows you to be so creative. And then I've always loved it for, like, tapping kind of stuff too. We have the compressor. Tapping, but not like Eddie Van Halen style. None of this. None of that stuff. Right. But I used to love, like, Michael Hedges. And so that kind of style of stuff like that.
Yeah, beautiful.
I adore. So that's where really an alternate tuning helps a ton with that, and even the ProMix course that is available now, that's based off of a tapping riff.
Amazing.
Which I'm going to butcher it because I don't really remember how I played it, to be honest. But
butcher away.
I think it was something like something like that. Something like that.
That's great. Now you make me want to try those kinds of things.
See, that's what you should try it. But I mean, it's
what? Huh?
But yeah, what I love about alternate tuning is also it takes you out of all your creative habits, because the physical mechanics of how to play guitar remain, but you don't know what the notes are anymore.
I feel like, wasn't that Robert Fripp was really into doing that in the 80s? He would just, like, have all these strange tunings to get. Yeah. Because otherwise we me in particular, get very guitar-y, and I rely on guitar riffs.
Totally. And, like, knowing, like, you have a lick that you can always pull out of your hat. And, like, if you're playing blues or something like that, sure, I get it. You're going to kind of stay, standard and tried and true. Yeah. But for the way I write and compose, I'm always looking for new ways to be inspired and like new tonalities.
Right.
So in that case, like, and just different kinds of harmonic shifts and harmonic changes. And so alternate tunings, ever since I got really into them, and I got into them when I was like 15, so a long time ago, they've always been a source of inspiration because guitar is my favorite instrument. It just is.
Great.
But hey,
I'm with you.
Yeah. But being able to take a guitar and then reinvent it in the sense like you still have, you have the physicality that you haven't lost that, but it's almost like being a kid again where you don't know exactly what you're doing.
Fantastic. We did promise we would talk a bit about the pedals.
Yeah.
So you've got obviously got my compressor, and we've got Misha's distortion pedal there.
So we've
PreAmp
got
pedal.
The Horizon Apex, and then an Eventide Rose, because we're just going to talk all about Eventide today, apparently.
Apparently.
Which is just I love that delay. And then I brought a Black Hole too, because Black Hole is my favorite effect basically ever. So having just the Black Hole pedal to go after the Rose is really nice because
show me how to use that. It's got a freeze function. I'm going to get out of the way.
It does.
Eric, why don't you come in there?
So this is the Eventide Rose, and it's a delay. It's kind of a hybrid digital analog delay where the delay itself is digital, but the filter it goes through is analog, and it kind of combines. It's kind of the best of both worlds to me, where you can do a Bucket Brigade Memory Man style thing, but also the trails are just perfect. So, this is what it sounds like. And there's a little bit of modulation. You can go nuts with the modulation if you want. But if we just, like, say, turn the feedback up, it's a really nice feedback. If we go weird. So, you could even turn it into a trem almost. So you can get weird with it, but just as far as like a normal delay goes, sounds fantastic. The filter is really good. As you go clockwise, it gets dark. And then if it's all the way to the counterclockwise to the left. I find I like it right around, I guess that's like 10 o'clock or something like that. That to me is where it just sits right. And that's basically what it does. And it's a really good sounding pedal. The nice thing is too, because it's got USB, you can actually sync it to Pro Tools or whatever your DAW is. It's a great delay.
Fantastic.
So that's the Rose. It's my most used pedal delay at this point. If we go into the Black Hole, which is the classic algorithm that Eventide's had, I'm going to take off the Rose for now, really ever since the DSP 4000. And I do have a DSP 4000, and it has pretty much permanently lived on the Black Hole setting for a decade. And it's stupid because I have 4 different hardware versions of Black Hole, maybe 5 at this point. I can't really remember, but doing this, and then the H9, the space pedal also, it all does Black Hole. And it's that massive, massive, massive modulating hull. So let's make the size as big as possible. Let's turn up the gravity, and we can turn up feedback too. And there's some modulation going on. You have to do a little bit of alternate. You hit this button, then you can adjust these other parameters. I'm not going to worry about that though, because it sounds good on its own. Sounds like nice lush modulation.
It's beautiful. So how does this freeze work?
And then, well,
that's what I'm looking at again. What's the freeze?
Okay, well, you can just freeze the sound and then play over it, which is cool. So, for instance, actually, let's do it with a low note. So now it's frozen, and so it just gives you a drone or whatever, and then it just does that.
I like it.
It's great. It's a phenomenal pedal, and just hit it and takes it off. So I love combining, you know, these two things together, of course, where you get a delay and a reverb, and together you're just like instant space world. Sounds awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I guess because we pulled out then this Apex preamp. This is the first time I'm using one of these ever, so Misha's going to have to probably tell me what I'm doing wrong. But bridge pickup. Pretty metal.
Pretty metal. That gate is pretty amazing.
Yeah, that worked. Yeah, that'll do, as they say.
Huge part of the sound.
Well, let's be stupid and let's like idiot metal.
Is that your sort of HM2 sound?
I killed all the mids and boosted the bass and the treble, but it did kind of sound like an HM2. Yeah. And then if you're me, I'd be like mid all the way. Something like that. I'm just eyeballing this here to hear how this sounds. Yeah.
So in the mid-range, are you a Marshall fan then?
Actually not. That's the funny thing. I don't mind. Like I have no problem playing them by any means. They're fun.
So what was it when you were using amps only? What were the amps?
My main one has actually been a single rectifier for I know and they don't have a lot of mid range, and I think that's where I realized I really like mids. Because
did you try using pedals pushed into it?
Yeah,
mids?
Yeah, I'll do that too. And then I put EL34s in it as opposed to the 6L6s, and then and it actually is a really good sounding amp if you kind of treat it unorthodoxly. And I found when I was doing the band thing years ago, what I'd often do with it was, because on a rectifier, the treble knob is so reactive to the like the other EQ knobs. So the treble knob, as you boost it, it actually kind of scoops the mids a bit. So I would turn the treble all the way off and then use the presence to bring the treble back in.
Right.
And
that makes sense.
And then it would just be like this really like live, really like chunky sound.
I've always found, even on Marshalls, that I crank the presence more than I crank.
Yeah, I like presence a lot more than treble, typically.
Yeah, definitely.
But then like I love like the diesel amps. Those are,
those are pretty metal.
Those are very, I mean, it's like, and I again, like my favorite guitar tone ever probably is like Adam Jones's tone off Tools Lateralis.
Right.
And that's a VH4. So, I mean, it's amongst, he always does the 3-amp setup thing.
Right.
And then like the Herbert is really, I like, when I've played that one before, it's like, ooh, this is nice. So there's something.
I see one in your future.
Yeah. I mean, they're not cheap. So it's, now these days, most of the time, I mean, at home, I have a deluxe reverb also. And I mean, I love it. And, the Mesa, but most of the time I use an Axe FX. And because it sounds phenomenal. And I am not great at miking cabs. I think I should be better at it, but every time I do it, I'm always disappointed compared to the result I get out of using an Axe FX. So there have been times where I've combined the two, where I've mic'd up the rectifier and layered that in with the Axe FX. But every time, for whatever reason, it just sounds, and I'm saying, the problem is sitting in this chair. It's probably not the mic, but it's, I've always just found I'm better, I'm more efficient, and it sounds great to me. So
Whatever works for you is what works.
That's what works. But I love real amps too, but that's almost like more of a hobby. Whereas, like professionally, what's going to work easiest for me is usually using the Axe effects. And then I'll use it also as like an effects unit where I'll send all sorts of things out of Pro Tools into the Axe, do all the processing in there, and then pipe it back. Because I just have it set up as an insert in Pro Tools.
I see.
So
fantastic.
Yeah. So I just use it for all sorts of processing.
As Matt was hinting at, he does have a ProMix Academy course. In fact, he already has another one, but this is a brand new one. There is a link down below. Check it out. Give me the 30-second, what is going on in the new course? Okay, so the 30-second spiel of what this thing is, basically, it's a recreation of how I would build a genre-bending house music track, start to finish. And that includes a basic mix down as well as all the instrumentation. It's done entirely in the box with the exception of the guitar, because the guitar has to be played and I'm not going to fake a guitar. That would hurt me too much. But but no, so aside from actually playing this live, then it's just, how you build this track completely from scratch. And it's just very much in the style of how I like to merge different genres constantly. And in this case, it's doing it with basically what would be almost a cinematic kind of dance track. Fantastic.
So, but you can't really dance to it. It's more of like a listening thing. But anyway, it's cool.
You haven't seen me dance.
Maybe you will now. But no, check it out. I think the music's cool. And it forced me to actually write a track from scratch, which was a really good thing because I've been in a little bit of a creative slump and I got really inspired doing it. So hopefully that translates and hopefully those of you who pick it up will learn something.
Marvelous. Thanks, everybody. Link down below. Please leave more comments and, of course, questions for future frequently asked questions. Fact Fridays. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, tutsins,
bye,
ciao.
as the girls say.
Goodbye.